Sarah Miller was 8 years old when her whole world fell apart. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in July, and her family was having their annual summer barbecue in the backyard. The smell of burgers and hot dogs filled the air while children ran around laughing and playing games. Emma, Sarah's 6-year-old sister, was wearing her favorite pink dress with white flowers. She had been so excited about the barbecue that morning, jumping on Sarah's bed to wake her up early. Emma loved family gatherings because she got to play with all their cousins and eat as much ice cream as she wanted. The backyard was full of people that day. Uncle Mike was flipping burgers on the grill while Aunt Linda arranged potato salad. On the picnic table, Cousin Jake and his brother Tommy were playing catch near the fence. Sarah's parents were busy talking to relatives they hadn't seen in months. Everyone was having such a good time. Sarah remembered being annoyed with Emma. That afternoon, her little sister kept following her around, wanting to play the same games as the older kids. Emma had sticky fingers from eating watermelon, and she kept trying to hold Sarah's hand. Sarah pushed her away, telling her to go play with the younger cousins instead. Emma's bottom lip trembled, like it always did when her feelings got hurt. She walked away slowly, dragging her feet. Sarah felt a little guilty, but she was too busy trying to impress her older cousin Jessica to pay much attention to Emma. The last time Sarah saw her sister, Emma was sitting on the old wooden swing that hung from the big oak tree in the corner of the yard. She was singing a little song to herself and swinging gently back and forth. Her blonde hair was shining in the sunlight, and she looked so small and innocent. Sarah got distracted playing hide-and-seek with her cousins. They were having so much fun running around the yard and hiding behind trees and bushes. The adults were all talking and laughing, not really watching the children too closely. Everyone felt safe in their own backyard, surrounded by family. It was Sarah's mom who first noticed something was wrong. She had been looking for Emma to give her a piece of birthday cake from Cousin Tommy's celebration. She called Emma's name, but there was no answer. She walked over to the swing where Emma had been sitting, but it was empty and moving slightly in the breeze. At first, everyone thought Emma was just hiding somewhere. The adults started calling her name while the children helped look behind trees and under the picnic table. Sarah's dad checked the house, thinking maybe Emma had gone inside to use the bathroom or get a drink of water. But as the minutes passed, sick feelings started growing in everyone's stomach. Emma was not the type of child to hide when adults were calling her name. She was usually obedient and would come running when her parents called. Something was definitely wrong. Sarah's Uncle Mike organized all the adults to search the neighborhood. They split up into groups and walked down every street, calling Emma's name. The neighbors came out to help when they heard what was happening. Mrs. Johnson, from next door, brought her flashlight, even though it was still daylight. Sarah felt terrible guilt eating at her heart. She kept thinking about how she had pushed Emma away and told her to go play somewhere else. What if Emma had wandered off because she felt unwanted? What if this was all Sarah's fault for being mean to her little sister? The police arrived just as the sun was starting to set. Officer Davis was a kind man who spoke gently to Sarah's parents. He asked them lots of questions about what Emma was wearing when they last saw her, and if she had ever wandered off before. Sarah's mom could barely speak through her tears. Police officers searched the house from top to bottom. They looked in every closet, under every bed, and in the basement. They checked the garage and the shed in the backyard. They even looked in the washing machine and dryer, hoping Emma might have climbed inside while playing hide-and-seek as night fell. More police officers arrived with flashlights and search dogs. The dogs sniffed Emma's clothes and toys, trying to pick up her scent. They searched through the nearby woods and along the creek that ran behind the neighborhood. Sarah watched from her bedroom window as flashlight beams moved through the darkness. Sarah's mom sat by the phone all night, hoping someone would call with news about Emma. Her dad paced back and forth in the living room, running his hands through his hair. Relatives stayed over to help with the search and to comfort the family. The next morning brought no good news. Emma's picture was on the local news and in the newspaper. The headline read, "Missing 6-year-old girl last seen at family barbecue." Sarah stared at Emma's smiling face in the photograph. Remembering how excited her sister had been that morning, days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The police followed every lead and interviewed everyone who had been at the barbecue. They checked with all the neighbors and searched every abandoned building in town. Sarah's parents offered a reward for any information about Emma, but no one came forward with helpful clues. The house felt empty and quiet without Emma's laughter and singing. Sarah's mom stopped cooking Emma's favorite foods and couldn't bear to go into her sister's bedroom. The pink dress Emma had been wearing was never found, and neither was any other trace of the little girl who had vanished from her own backyard. Sarah grew up carrying the weight of that terrible day. She never stopped wondering what had happened to Emma and if she could have done something different to protect her little sister. The guilt and sadness became part of who she was, shaping every decision she made for the next 20 years. The case officially went cold after 2 years, but Sarah's family never gave up hope that someday they would find answers about what happened to Emma on that sunny Saturday afternoon when everything changed forever. 20 years had passed since that horrible day, but Sarah Miller still woke up thinking about Emma every single morning. She was now 28 years old and worked as a social worker for the County Child Services Department. Her job was to visit families and make sure children were safe and well cared for. Sarah had chosen this career because of Emma. She wanted to help find missing children and protect kids who might be in danger. Every case she worked on reminded her of her little sister. Sometimes she would see a blonde girl with green eyes, and her heart would skip a beat, wondering if it could somehow be Emma. The pain of losing Emma had torn Sarah's family apart. Parents had divorced when she was 10 years old. Her mother blamed her father for not watching Emma closely enough at the barbecue. Her father blamed her mother for being too busy talking to relatives. They both blamed themselves and each other until they couldn't live in the same house anymore. Sarah's mom had moved to another state and rarely called. Her dad had remarried, but he never talked about Emma anymore. It was too painful for him to remember. Sarah felt like she was the only one who still carried Emma's memory every day. On a Tuesday morning in October, Sarah was driving to visit a foster family as part of her regular duties. The Chen family had been taking care of foster children for several years. Sarah needed to check on 3 kids who were staying with them temporarily. Mrs. Chen was a kind woman in her 50s who lived in a big house on Maple Street. She had been unable to have children of her own, so she dedicated her life to helping kids who needed homes. Sarah always enjoyed visiting the Chen house because Mrs. Chen treated every child like they were her own. When Sarah knocked on the front door, Mrs. Chen opened it with a warm smile. She was wearing a flowered apron and had flour on her hands from baking cookies. The house smelled like chocolate chip cookies and cinnamon. Mrs. Chen led Sarah into the living room, where the 3 foster children were playing quietly. 2 boys named Marcus and David were building with blocks, while a little girl named Sophie was coloring in a book. Everything seemed normal and peaceful. As they were talking about how the children were adjusting to their new home, Sarah heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Mrs. Chen called out that someone was coming to help serve lunch to the children. Sarah looked up and felt like the world stopped spinning. A young woman appeared at the bottom of the stairs, carrying a tray with sandwiches and juice boxes. She had long blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that made Sarah's heart race. The woman looked exactly like Sarah remembered Emma would look if she had grown up. She had the same dimpled smile, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking, and the same gentle way of moving. Sarah felt dizzy and had to grab the arm of her chair to steady herself. Mrs. Chen introduced the young woman as Amy Chen, her adopted daughter. Amy smiled and waved at Sarah, then knelt down to help the little foster children with their lunch. Sarah watched in shock as Amy cut the crusts off Sophie's sandwich. Just like Emma used to ask their mom to do, Amy appeared to be in her mid-20s, which would be exactly the right age if she was Emma. She was wearing a simple blue dress and had a small scar on her left hand that looked familiar to Sarah. Most shocking of all, Sarah could see a birthmark on Amy's left wrist that looked exactly like the one Emma had. Sarah tried to act normal and continue her visit, but her mind was racing. She asked Mrs. Chen casual questions about Amy, trying not to sound too interested. Mrs. Chen explained that she had adopted Amy when she was 7 years old. After Amy's parents had died in a car accident, Mrs. Chen said Amy had been traumatized by losing her parents and didn't remember much about her life before coming to live with them. She had been a quiet, sad little girl who had nightmares for months. But with love and patience, Amy had grown into a wonderful young woman who helped Mrs. Chen care for the foster children. Sarah watched Amy, playing with the children, and felt tears building in her eyes. Amy had the same laugh as Emma. She made the same funny faces that Emma used to make. She even had the same habit of twirling her hair around her finger when she was concentrating. When it was time to leave, Sarah shook hands with Amy and felt a strange electric feeling. Amy looked into Sarah's eyes for a moment longer than normal, as if she was trying to remember something. For just a second, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of recognition in those green eyes. Sarah drove home in a daze, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She kept telling herself that it was impossible. There were probably thousands of young women with blonde hair and green eyes. She was just seeing what she wanted to see because she missed Emma so much. But that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Amy's smile, her laugh, and especially that birthmark on her wrist. Emma had been born with a small brown birthmark shaped like a heart on her left wrist. Sarah had seen the exact same mark on Amy's wrist. Sarah knew she had to find out the truth, but she was scared. What if Amy really was Emma? What if she had been living just a few miles away all these years? What if Mrs. Chen knew something about Emma's disappearance? What if Sarah was wrong, and she was about to destroy an innocent family based on desperate hopes? Sarah made a decision that night. She was going to investigate Amy Chen very carefully. She would use all her professional resources to find out everything she could about Amy's past. If there was even a small chance that Amy was Emma, Sarah had to know the truth. The next morning, Sarah started her secret investigation. Not knowing that she was about to uncover secrets that would change everything she thought, she knew about that terrible day 20 years ago. Sarah couldn't get Amy Chen out of her mind. Every night for a week, she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, searching through databases and public records. She had access to government systems through her job as a social worker, and she was determined to find out everything she could about Amy's past. The first thing Sarah discovered was that Amy's birth certificate looked suspicious. The paper was the right type and had official stamps, but something about the dates and locations didn't match up with other records. Sarah had seen hundreds of birth certificates in her work. This one had small details that seemed wrong. Sarah found that Amy Chen had first appeared in the system when she was 7 years old, right around the time Emma had disappeared. Before that age, there were no school records, no medical records, and no trace of Amy existing anywhere. It was as if she had simply appeared out of nowhere. The more Sarah investigated, the more worried she became. Mrs. Chen had moved to their current city just 2 months after Emma's disappearance. She had come from a town that was only 50 miles away from where Emma had vanished. This couldn't be a coincidence. Sarah decided to drive to Mrs. Chen's old neighborhood to ask questions. She told her supervisor she was taking a personal day and drove to the small town where Mrs. Chen had lived 20 years ago. The town was quiet and peaceful, with tree-lined streets and old houses. Sarah started by visiting the local library, where she looked through old newspapers from 20 years ago. She found a few mentions of Mrs. Chen in the community news section. Mrs. Chen had been involved in charity work and had volunteered at the local children's hospital. She seemed like a kind person who genuinely cared about helping kids. But then, Sarah found something that made her stomach drop. In a newspaper from 22 years ago, there was a small article about Mrs. Chen being questioned by police about missing children. The article said she had been investigated for possible involvement in child trafficking. But the charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. Sarah felt sick as she read the article. Mrs. Chen had been suspected of taking children before, right around the time Emma disappeared. Sarah printed out the article and drove to the police station to ask more questions. The police officer who had worked on the case 20 years ago was now retired. But Sarah managed to find his phone number. Officer Martinez agreed to meet her at a coffee shop the next day. He was a kind man in his 70s who remembered the case clearly. Officer Martinez told Sarah that Mrs. Chen had been part of a group that helped place children in new homes. On the surface, it looked like legitimate adoption work, but they suspected she was taking children illegally and creating fake documents for them. The problem was that they could never prove it in court. He explained that Mrs. Chen had connections with people who could create false birth certificates and adoption papers. She had been very careful to cover her tracks, and the children she placed always seemed happy and well cared for. This made it hard to build a case against her. Sarah asked Officer Martinez if he remembered any specific cases involving blonde girls around Emma's age. He thought for a moment and said there had been rumors about a little girl who had suddenly appeared in Mrs. Chen's care around that time, but they had never been able to investigate it properly. Sarah showed Officer Martinez the photos she had taken of Amy, and his eyes widened. He said Amy looked exactly like a girl he had seen with Mrs. Chen 20 years ago. He remembered being suspicious but having no legal way to investigate further. Sarah drove home feeling both excited and terrified. She now had strong evidence that Mrs. Chen had been involved in illegal activities involving children. But she still needed concrete proof that Amy was actually Emma. She couldn't accuse Mrs. Chen of kidnapping without being absolutely certain. That evening, Sarah decided to do something risky. She drove past Mrs. Chen's house and parked across the street, hoping to observe Amy without being seen. She felt like a stalker, but she needed to gather more evidence. Through the living room window, Sarah could see Amy helping Mrs. Chen prepare dinner. They looked like a normal mother and daughter, laughing and talking as they cooked together. Sarah felt confused watching them. If Mrs. Chen had stolen Emma, why did they seem so happy and loving together? Sarah noticed that Amy had a small scar on her left hand that looked familiar. Emma had gotten a similar scar when she was 5 years old, falling off her bike and cutting her hand on a broken piece of glass. Sarah remembered rushing Emma to the hospital and how brave her little sister had been while getting stitches. As Sarah watched, Amy walked to the window and looked out at the street. For a moment, their eyes met across the darkness. Amy tilted her head curiously, as if she was trying to figure out why someone was sitting in a car outside their house. Sarah quickly started her car and drove away, her heart pounding. The next day, Sarah made a difficult decision. She called her father, who still lived in the same house where Emma had disappeared. She hadn't spoken to him in months because it was too painful for both of them to talk about Emma. Sarah's father was surprised to hear from her, but he became very interested when she explained what she had discovered. He agreed to meet her for lunch so she could show him the photographs and evidence she had gathered. Sarah was nervous about getting her father's hopes up, but she needed his help. When Sarah showed her father the pictures of Amy, he started crying. Said Amy looked exactly like Emma would look if she had grown up. He pointed out small details that Sarah had missed, like the way Amy held her head when she smiled and the shape of her ears. Sarah's father wanted to call the police immediately, but Sarah convinced him to wait. She explained that they needed more evidence before they could accuse Mrs. Chen of anything. They decided to hire a private investigator to help them gather more information. The private investigator, a woman named Detective Rodriguez, was experienced in missing person cases. She agreed to help them investigate Amy's background more thoroughly. She warned them that the process might take several weeks, and that they should be prepared for any outcome. As Sarah left the meeting with Detective Rodriguez, she felt like she was finally getting close to the truth. But she also felt scared about what they might discover. If Amy really was Emma, what would happen to the life she had built with Mrs. Chen? And what would happen to Mrs. Chen, who might have genuinely believed she was helping a child in need? Sarah realized that finding the truth might create as many problems as it solved, but she knew she had to keep searching until she had all the answers. Sarah couldn't keep her secret any longer. For 3 weeks, she had been investigating Amy Chen's background and finding more disturbing information every day. The birth certificates looked fake. Mrs. Chen's story had holes in it, and Amy's timeline perfectly matched Emma's disappearance. Sarah's hands were shaking as she realized what she had to do. She needed to talk to Amy directly, but she had to be careful. If Amy really was Emma, this conversation could change both of their lives forever. If Sarah was wrong, she could destroy an innocent family and make herself look crazy. But she couldn't sleep anymore, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except finding out the truth Sarah decided to approach Amy at the small coffee shop where she worked part-time. She had learned Amy's schedule through careful observation. Every Thursday afternoon, Amy worked the closing shift at Sunnyside Cafe, a cozy little place downtown with yellow walls and comfortable chairs. On Thursday at 4 o'clock, Sarah walked into the cafe trying to look casual. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. Amy was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine and humming softly to herself. She looked up when Sarah entered and smiled that same dimpled smile that haunted Sarah's dreams. Amy greeted Sarah warmly, remembering her from the visit to Mrs. Chen's house. Sarah ordered a regular coffee and sat down at a corner table, trying to figure out how to start the most important conversation of her life. Her hands were trembling as she opened her purse and pulled out a folder filled with photographs and documents. When Amy brought the coffee to her table, Sarah asked if she could sit down for a moment. Amy looked around the nearly empty cafe and nodded, sliding into the chair across from Sarah. Sarah noticed Amy's nervous habit of twirling her hair around her finger. Exactly like Emma used to do? Sarah started slowly, telling Amy that she had been impressed by how good she was with the foster children. Amy's face lit up as she talked about how much she loved kids and how Mrs. Chen had taught her to be patient and kind. Sarah felt her heart breaking as she listened to Amy's sweet voice. Then Sarah took a deep breath and pulled out an old photograph from her folder. It was a picture of Emma taken just 2 weeks before she disappeared. Emma was wearing a red sweater and sitting on the same swing where Sarah had last seen her. Sarah placed the photograph on the table between them. Amy looked down at the picture and her face went completely white. She stared at the little girl in the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at Sarah with confusion in her green eyes. Sarah could see that Amy was shaking slightly as she picked up the photograph to look at it more closely. Sarah asked Amy if the little girl in the picture looked familiar to her. Amy's voice was barely a whisper as she said the child looked exactly like her baby pictures. But that was impossible, she said. She had never seen this photograph before, and she didn't remember owning a red sweater like that. Sarah pulled out more photographs. Pictures of Emma playing in the backyard. Emma on her 5th birthday. Emma and Sarah together at Christmas. With each photograph, Amy became more pale and shaken. She kept saying it was impossible, but Sarah could see recognition growing in her eyes. Finally, Sarah pulled out the missing person flyer from 20 years ago. The one with Emma's smiling face and the word missing in big black letters. Amy stared at her own childhood face on the flyer. Tears started streaming down her cheeks. Sarah gently explained that she believed Amy was actually Emma Miller, her little sister who had disappeared from their family barbecue 20 years ago. Amy shook her head, saying that couldn't be true because she was Amy Chen and had always been Amy Chen. But as Sarah kept talking, Amy's confidence began to crumble. Sarah told her about the birthmark on her wrist, about the way she tilted her head when thinking, about her habit of cutting crusts off sandwiches. Amy touched the birthmark on her wrist unconsciously. As if she was noticing it for the first time, Amy started crying harder and admitted that she'd always felt like something was missing from her life. She said she had strange dreams sometimes, about a different house, a different family, and a girl who looked like her, calling her name. She had never understood those dreams, but they felt so real. Sarah reached across the table and took Amy's hand. She told her about the day Emma disappeared, about how guilty she had felt for 20 years, about how their family had fallen apart. Amy listened with wide eyes, occasionally nodding as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Amy asked Sarah about their parents, about what their house had looked like, about what games they used to play together. Sarah answered every question, watching as Amy's face showed more and more recognition. When Sarah mentioned Emma's favorite song, Amy started humming it without realizing what she was doing. The two women sat in the empty cafe for 2 hours, sharing memories and trying to understand what had happened. Amy admitted that she had no clear memories from before age 7, which Mrs. Chen had always explained as trauma from losing her. In a car accident, Sarah suggested they take a DNA test to know for sure. Amy agreed immediately, saying she needed to know the truth, even if it turned her whole world upside down. They made an appointment for the next day. Both knowing that their lives would never be the same again, as they prepared to leave the cafe, Amy grabbed Sarah's arm and asked what would happen if the test proved she was Emma. Sarah told her honestly that she didn't know, but that they would figure it out together. Amy nodded, wiping away her tears. Sarah drove home that night feeling hope and terror in equal measure. She had found her sister, but she had also discovered that nothing about Emma's disappearance was what it seemed. Tomorrow they would know for sure, and then they would have to face whatever truth was waiting. For them, Sarah couldn't sleep or eat for the next 3 days while waiting for the DNA test results. She kept checking her phone every few minutes, hoping the lab would call with the news that would change everything. Amy had been just as anxious, calling Sarah twice a day to see if she had heard anything yet. On Friday afternoon, Sarah's phone finally rang. The lab technician's voice was professional and calm as she delivered the news that made Sarah's heart stop. The DNA test was a perfect match. Amy Chen was definitely Emma Miller, Sarah's little sister who had been missing for 20 years. Sarah immediately called Amy, who started crying the moment she heard the results. They agreed to meet at the same coffee shop where they had first talked about the truth. This time they sat in the back corner where no one could see Amy's tears or hear their conversation. Amy kept saying she didn't know who she was anymore. For 20 years, she had been Amy Chen, the adopted daughter of a kind woman who had saved her from a terrible tragedy. Now she was Emma Miller, a kidnapped child whose disappearance had destroyed a family. She felt like her entire life had been a lie. Sarah held Amy's hands across the table and told her they needed to confront Mrs. Chen together. They had to find out how Mrs. Chen had gotten Emma and why she had lied about adopting her after her parents died in a car accident. Amy was scared, but she knew they needed answers. That evening, Sarah and Amy drove to Mrs. Chen's house together. Amy's hands were shaking as she used her key to open the front door. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen making dinner, and she looked surprised to see Sarah with Amy. She could immediately tell something was wrong by the serious expressions on their faces. Amy asked Mrs. Chen to sit down at the kitchen table because they needed to talk about something important. Mrs. Chen's face went pale as Amy pulled out the DNA test results and the old missing person flyer. She stared at the documents without saying a word. Sarah watched Mrs. Chen's reaction carefully. The older woman's hands began to tremble, and she looked like she was about to be sick. Sarah asked her directly if she had known that Amy was really Emma Miller, a missing child from 20 years ago. Mrs. Chen started crying and put her face in her hands. For several minutes, she couldn't speak at all. Amy knelt beside her chair and asked her to please tell them the truth. Mrs. Chen looked at Amy with tears streaming down her face and said she was sorry for lying all these years. Then Mrs. Chen told them a story that was completely different from what they had expected. She said she had never kidnapped Emma or stolen her from her family. She admitted that someone had brought Emma to her house 20 years ago. But it wasn't her idea, and she hadn't planned it. Mrs. Chen explained that Sarah's Uncle Mike had shown up at her door one night with a scared little girl. He told Mrs. Chen that the child was being hurt by her family and needed to be rescued. He said Emma's parents were planning to hurt her badly and that she would die if she stayed with them. Uncle Mike had known that Mrs. Chen wanted children but couldn't have any of her own, convinced her that she would be saving Emma's life. By taking her in and giving her a new identity, Mrs. Chen believed she was doing the right thing by protecting a child from abuse. Amy stared at Mrs. Chen in shock. She asked why Uncle Mike would lie about their family hurting her. Mrs. Chen said she didn't know, but Uncle Mike had seemed very convincing and urgent. He had given her fake adoption papers and told her to move to a different state to keep Emma safe. Sarah felt sick to her stomach as she realized what had really happened. Uncle Mike had been at the family barbecue the day Emma disappeared, had been one of the people searching for Emma and comforting their parents. He had been lying to everyone while he knew exactly where Emma was. Mrs. Chen continued her story, explaining that she had been too afraid to contact the authorities over the years. She had genuinely grown to love Emma as her own daughter and was terrified of losing her. She also worried that Uncle Mike might hurt them both if she tried to tell the truth. Amy asked Mrs. Chen if she ever suspected that Uncle Mike was lying. About the abuse, Mrs. Chen admitted that as the years passed, she had begun to wonder. Emma never showed signs of being afraid of family or having traumatic memories of abuse. She seemed like a normal, happy child who had just lost her memories, Sarah asked Mrs. Chen if Uncle Mike had ever contacted her again after that first night. Mrs. Chen said he had called her once a year to check on Emma and make sure she was keeping quiet. He always reminded her that Emma would be in danger if anyone found out where she was. The three women sat in the quiet kitchen, trying to process this shocking revelation. Sarah realized that Uncle Mike had manipulated everyone. He had destroyed her family by taking Emma. And then he had manipulated Mrs. Chen into believing she was saving Emma's life. Amy asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Why would Uncle Mike do such a terrible thing to his own family? What could he have gained by taking Emma away from people who loved her? Sarah said she didn't know, but she was determined to find out. Mrs. Chen told them that Uncle Mike had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Sarah felt angry and frustrated that they would never be able to confront him or get answers about his motives. He had taken his secrets to the grave, leaving behind only pain and confusion. Amy looked at both women and said she didn't know what to do next. She loved Mrs. Chen, who had raised her with kindness and care. But she also felt betrayed by the lies and wanted to reconnect with her real family. Sarah promised they would figure out how to move forward together as they sat in that kitchen. All three women realized that Uncle Mike's actions had created a situation where everyone was both a victim and a survivor. Now they had to decide how to build a future based on truth instead of lies. Sarah knew she had to tell her parents about finding Emma, but she was terrified of how they would react. Her mother lived 3 states away and rarely spoke to the family anymore. Her father had remarried and tried to move on from the pain of losing Emma. Sarah worried that bringing Emma back might open old wounds that had never properly healed. She decided to call her father first. When she told him over the phone that she had found Emma, he was silent for so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped.
How?
Then she heard him crying, something she hadn't heard since she was a child. He said he would drive over immediately and asked Sarah to repeat everything twice to make sure he had heard correctly. Sarah's father arrived at her apartment 2 hours later, looking older and more fragile than she remembered. His hands were shaking as Sarah showed him the DNA test results and recent photographs of Emma. He stared at the pictures for a long time, touching Emma's face through the glass frame. Emma was nervous about meeting her biological father after 20 years. She had no clear memories of him and wasn't sure what to expect. Sarah arranged for them to meet at a quiet restaurant where they could talk privately. Emma wore a simple blue dress and kept playing with her hair, a nervous habit that made Sarah's father smile the moment he saw her. The reunion was emotional and awkward at the same time. Emma's father cried when he saw her, telling her how much he had missed her and how sorry he was for not protecting her. Emma didn't know how to respond because she had no memories of him, but she could see the genuine love and pain in his eyes. Emma asked her father to tell her about their family and what she had been like as a child. He showed her pictures on his phone and told her stories about her favorite toys, the songs she used to sing, and the way she used to fall asleep holding her stuffed rabbit. Emma listened carefully, hoping some of the memories would come back. Sarah's father explained that their mother had moved to California after the divorce and had changed her phone number several times. He wasn't sure if she would want to be contacted about Emma being found. The divorce had been bitter, and Emma's disappearance had created too much pain for their mother to handle. Against her father's advice, Sarah decided to call her mother. Anyway, the conversation was difficult and emotional. Sarah's mother didn't believe her at first, thinking it was some kind of cruel joke. When Sarah sent her the DNA test results and photographs, her mother broke down completely. Sarah's mother said she had spent 20 years trying to forget about Emma because the pain was too much to bear. She had moved across the country, changed her name, and built a completely new life. She said she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to see Emma again and face all those buried emotions. Emma felt hurt and confused by her biological mother's reaction. She had hoped that finding her real family would feel like coming home, but instead it felt complicated and painful. She told Sarah that sometimes she wished they had never learned the truth because it was causing so much additional pain for everyone. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chen was struggling with her own emotions. She loved Emma like her own daughter and was terrified of losing her. She had taken care of Emma for 20 years, helped her through school, and watched her grow into a wonderful young woman. Now she worried that Emma would leave her to be with her biological family. Emma made a decision that surprised everyone. She told Mrs. Chen that she wanted to keep both families in her life. Mrs. Chen had been a loving mother to her for 20 years, and she wasn't going to abandon her now. Emma said she would always be grateful to Mrs. Chen for taking care of her. Even if the circumstances had been built on lies, Sarah was amazed by Emma's maturity and kindness. Even after learning that her entire life had been based on deception, Emma chose forgiveness over anger. She understood that Mrs. Chen had believed she was saving Emma's life and had genuinely loved her as a daughter. The family decided not to press charges against Mrs. Chen. They realized that she had been manipulated by Uncle Mike just like everyone else. Mrs. Chen had provided Emma with a loving home and a good education. Sending her to prison wouldn't undo the past or bring back the lost years. Emma chose to legally change her name to Emma Miller Chen, combining both of her identities. She wanted to honor the family that had raised her while also reconnecting with her biological roots. It was her way of bridging the gap between who she had been and who she was becoming. Sarah's mother eventually agreed to meet Emma, but it took several months of therapy and emotional preparation. Their first meeting was tearful and healing for both of them. Emma's mother apologized for staying away for so long and promised to be part of Emma's life going forward. The sisters began building their relationship slowly. Emma had missed 20 years of Sarah's life, and Sarah had missed watching Emma grow up. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and learning about each other as adults. Sarah was amazed by how strong and compassionate Emma had become despite everything she had been through. Emma continued living with Mrs. Chen, but spent weekends with Sarah and their father. She started working as a counselor for missing children, using her unique experience to help other families dealing with similar tragedies. Emma said that if her story could help one family find their missing child, then all the pain would have been worth it. The family never learned why Uncle Mike had taken Emma or what he had gained from destroying so many lives. Some questions would never be answered, but they decided to focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. They had found each other again, and that was what mattered most. Sarah looked at her sister and realized that Emma had grown into exactly the kind of person she would have wanted her to become. Despite being taken from her family, despite living a lie for 20 years, Emma had become kind, forgiving, and strong. She had survived something terrible and chosen to use her experience to help others. The family was different now, broken in some ways, but also stronger in others. They had learned that love could survive even the worst circumstances, and that truth, no matter how painful, was always better than living a lie. Emma was home, and that was all that really mattered.